So thanks for coming and welcome to our Sydney breakfast event titled Building or Bullying, Tackling Performance Management. My name is Ben Eastman and I'm a psychologist and a senior consultant at Voice Project. If you don't know of us already, Voice Project is a research and consulting company based at Macquarie University. Our purpose is to help organisations to achieve positive changes through giving people a voice. We achieve that primarily through the use of survey tools, looking at indicators such as staff engagement, performance, leadership and service quality. To kick us off today, we have Dr. Peter Langford. He's here to tell you about some of the insights that we've gained from our work across a variety of organisations. Pete will also draw on engagement survey data that we've collected from over 2,700 organisations and leadership data collected from over 700 participants in our 360 surveys. Pete is the director and founder of Voice Project. He's also held previous positions as a senior lecturer in human resources at Macquarie University, director of the organisational psychology program at Macquarie, and in change management consulting at Accenture. Pete was awarded the Macquarie University Innovation Award for commercial application of research and the Alton Mayo Award for early career achievement from the College of Organisational Psychology. Of course, Pete's also my boss, so I'll be paying very close attention during his presentation with my performance review coming up shortly and taking quite a few notes. Okay, over to you, Pete.
Who loves performance appraisals? I mean, who gets up in the morning and goes, today I have a performance appraisal? Oh yeah. No hands? None? Well, there are a few consultants and authors out there that are playing on that fear, and you may be seeing some of these headlines. This is from Ed Lawler, who's a big name in managements. And there I found a book that was the end of the performance review that's been recently published as well, saying that performance appraisals are dead. So the performance review process isn't working, let's get rid of it. To this I say, rubbish. And if the humble but mighty performance appraisal had a voice, I believe it would borrow from Mark Twain and suggest that reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. The types of articles and books that touch upon this issue, pretty much if you read through them, don't argue against the process of performance appraisal in general, but they tend to talk about that singular annual performance review. If that's all that's being done in an organisation, then that's not sufficient. Essentially, the big message is that we're not getting performance appraisals right, and we need to do something better. So that's the job for this morning. I'm a data dude. I'm going to present some of the data from our survey work, so digging into lots of benchmark data that we've got. The practical stuff, I'll finish with a bit of practical stuff that I see from our data, but the real practical stuff will come from our presenters, guest speakers a little bit later. So if you like the stats, then now's your time. If you don't like the stats, then just sort of try to soak up the holistic message that comes with the numbers. Here's the agenda that I'm going to go through. I'm going to touch upon the engagement surveys and 360 surveys. I should mention the Dilbert cartoon. In preparation for the breakfast, I like getting some kind of cartoon or something in there, and I went to dilbert.com, and I was sitting in my study at home, and my wife afterwards, Narelle, said, what was going on in there? Because every few minutes I just burst out laughing out loud, I did a search for performance review through Dilbert, so I'd encourage you to go there if you're interested in the topic. I had real struggle choosing an appropriate cartoon to put here. So in fact, I ended up going with two. There's one on my last slide as well. But I thought this one captured nicely the different emotions that people have for the performance review process. Of course, you've got the 5 stages of dealing with death in there as well, but I think Scott Adams, the author of Dilbert, saying that performance reviews are even worse than death because there's 2 more stages that you have to go through, which is the trash talking and recovery. Before we get into this though, some technology, the little clickers that are in the bowls, so you can reach for one of those now if you like. I'm going to go through these 10 challenges associated with performance appraisals. And I'm going to get you to rate to what degree have these been challenges in your organisation in trying to improve your performance appraisal and review process. I don't pretend that these are the only 10 challenges, but what I have done, the first 3 are getting at to what degree do problems come from 3 different groups of people: senior staff, from unions, or from non-unionised staff. There's a question there about the role of technology. To what degree does that cause a problem for performance appraisal system? Just getting staff to complete, number 5, the on-time completion of appraisals. Number 6 is more about the process. Do people fill in the right forms and do it the right way? 7 and 8 are about the skills that supervisors or staff have. And 9's looking about the linking of performance appraisals with some kind of outcome that's tangible to an employee. And finally, number 10, tapping into that issue of bullying and complaints and grievances coming out of the process. So let's see how we go with this. Here are the rules. You just have to press the number. It's going to be a 1 to 4 based on the extent of the challenge on the clicker. A green light means that your number has gone through, and I will be reporting the results of this immediately afterwards. You can change your score if you really need to. It's whatever is the last number that you press that we will gather. I'll give you 10 seconds for each of these to give your opinion, so you need to be fairly quick. Don't think too long and hard about this. And we're not pretending this is a highly scientific study, but we're hoping we get some interesting outcomes. And of course, hand your keypads back afterwards if we can. Now, I do have to thank Phil from KP1. Is Phil still around? Yep, Phil's up in the back corner. So thank you very much to Phil for allowing us to use this technology. Clearly, there's a widespread use of the clickers that are happening here. It's a neat little bit of technology, and as you see, it's a very quick way of gathering feedback from any kind of group of people, whether it be sort of opinions like this or any kind of voting system as well. So Phil's details are there, and I believe some cards might be on your tables if you're interested. All right, here's the rating scale we're going to use. So 1 wasn't a challenge at all, up to 4 was a major challenge. So thinking about your organisation's attempts to improve performance appraisal, to what degree were these challenges? All right, so here we go. Getting agreement from senior leaders on the process and content of performance appraisals. Give you 10 seconds. All right, moving on. Number 2, getting agreement from unions on the process and content of performance appraisals. If you don't have unions, just don't provide an answer. Number 3, getting agreement from non-unionised staff on the process and content of performance appraisals. Number 4, developing or sourcing the technology and tools used for the process. Number 5, ensuring on-time completion of appraisals by supervisors. Number 6, ensuring correct processes and documents are completed. Number 7, ensuring supervisors have the skills needed to effectively deliver the feedback. 8, we're getting there, ensuring staff, so who are receiving the feedback, have the skills needed to receive and respond to the feedback. Number 9, linking performance appraisals with promotions, pay and or incentives. And last but not least, handling complaints or grievances arising from the performance appraisal process. All right, let's see how we go. We've got our list of scores. So there we go. And I don't know what to make of this. You can pop your keypads back. We'll have a quick look at the biggest challenges, the weakest challenges, and then I'll just leave it to our guest speakers to comment on these as part of their presentation. But remembering it's a scale of 1 to 4, 1 being the lowest, 4 being the highest, so pretty high, 3.5 for ensuring on-time completion. So regardless of whether or not it's actually there, it's getting supervisors to do the thing. Now, of course, there might be various reasons behind that. 3.35, not too far behind, ensuring supervisors have the skills needed to effectively deliver feedback. Also above 3, ensuring staff have the skills. So it's a bit of a skills issue both for supervisors and staff. And the fourth one, they're ensuring correct appraisal processes and documents are completed. Some more about the processes rather than the technology itself. Right down the bottom, the lowest couple, getting agreement from unions is not a problem. Now, maybe there were a few people who went, oh, when I said don't fill it in if you didn't have unions. So maybe that's was a bit of noise in that data there. But getting agreement from non-unionised staff. So where's the senior staff in there? Getting agreement, 2.75, getting agreement from senior leaders is more of a problem. Not too much more, but more of a problem than getting agreement from staff, which was an interesting outcome. All right, I'm not going to dwell on that for time. I want to make sure that our guest speakers have plenty of time to do their bits. But we will make this available one way or another post breakfast if you want to get these stats for any of your internal things. All right, please return the clicker pads to your bowls and don't run out with them. All right, in 10 minutes, I'm going to briefly cover off some of the data that's come out of our engagement surveys and 360 surveys. And I apologise if you're not familiar with these models. I'll probably assume a little bit of a knowledge of some of our models. But here's our model for engagement. By no means it's not the only one out there. I don't pretend that it's perfect. We think it's a pretty good one. In fact, this was one of the things that I was doing research on when I was at Macquarie University, which led into the commercial work that Voice Project has become. Basically, we have outcomes over on the right-hand sides, how passionate or engaged staff are and whether or not the organisation is achieving objectives, and then a whole range of management practices that contribute to those outcomes. Of relevance to today's discussion, though, we do have one of the categories within the survey for performance appraisal. And there's 3 questions in that ask about the frequency of, so sufficient frequency of performance appraisals, whether or not the process is fair, and whether or not the feedback that people receive is useful. So those are the things that we're assessing. So what I will do in a moment is show the other characteristics of organisations that are doing performance appraisal well. What else are they doing well? So in a sense, what is the culture of an organisation that does performance appraisal well? Also relevant, we have one question within our diversity questions about bullying. So I'll do the same thing for bullying, and I'll have a look at in a sense, the culture of an organisation that manages bullying well or that doesn't get high scores for bullying. So let's have a look at that. Here's first page of stats, and I'll briefly explain how I'm presenting the results. You'll see different colours, of course. Colour coding is based on the percentage favourable score. So we have the category, we have the question itself, we have the average score for that particular question. So this is 53% favourable across those 180,000 employees that are represented in our database. So on average, the organisations out there score 53% favourable. The yellow, it gets a yellow because it's between 50 and 80. If it's higher than 80, it gets a green. If it's lower than 50, it gets a red. The little coloured bar there, just as a representation of the 53%. The blue bar is an indication of how important that practice is for performance appraisal. So it's a correlation if you're into your stats. It's an indicator of those organisations that do performance appraisal well, do these things well at the same time. So, on the assumption that you have some understanding of that, basically what I'm going to present up on these next few slides, these are the things that organisations get right for those organisations that have effective performance appraisal and minimal bullying being reported. So there's a belief that rewards and recognition are fair, that the organisation broadly fulfils obligations, and we've got a few developmental issues here tapping into careers, and training as well. So a broad sense of recognition and development. Well, maybe no great surprise there for effective performance appraisal. Let's keep digging. Here I've actually tapped into the top 5 gaps. So basically the top 5 differences between these 2 bars. And we get pretty much the same kind of picture. But we do get, down the bottom here, involvements. This is an interesting one. Performance appraisal, you naturally think is sort of a top-down affair, but one of the things that organisations get right, that do performance appraisal well, is that they involve staff. So staff are feeling consulted in decisions within the organisation. Let's have a look at the issues for bullying. So for bullying, these are the top 5 predictors. Organisations that have low reports of bullying do these things well. Little report of discrimination or sexual harassment, and broadly staff feel as though there's equal opportunity for all staff. Ethics comes up, so broadly they see the organisation as ethical. And interestingly, I didn't pick this one, but safety comes up as one of the issues that organisations that have low bullying also have high reports of safety. And I think there's a broad message there of sort of respect for or desire for the well-being of staff coming through there. Finally, the last slide here on bullying. These are, again, cutting the data in a slightly different way, looking for the biggest gaps. We get a similar story, but what's really interesting is we get a couple of senior leadership questions pop up here. Now, there's 85 questions that could have been shown here, so we're basically picking out the top 5 of 85 potential questions across all of those practices. And what for me is interesting about senior leadership showing up here is that supervision has not shown up. That is, rating of the quality of supervision in organisations does not correlate very strongly with the reports of bullying in organisations, but ratings of the relationship and quality of senior leadership does correlate fairly strongly with reports of bullying, and I think that was an interesting insight when I was going through this. All right, 2 more slides for stats coming after this one, now digging into our 360 data. So here's our model for 360s. Broadly, we assess whether or not, when we're doing 360s, whether or not raters feel that the leader is overall effective, and then we get them to assess the leader on a whole range of behaviours. The interesting one or relevant one for today's presentation is performance correction. So I'll tap into that. So broadly, whether or not leaders are able to correct undesirable behaviour and manage conflict well within their teams. So let's have a look at the style, the leadership behaviours that correlates with effective performance correction. These leaders, number 1 was a surprise to me. The strongest predictor of managing performance correction is takes action to prevent problems from occurring. Maybe not surprising in hindsight, but what it is saying is that those leaders act early rather than act late when it comes to managing undesirable behaviour in organisations. We get a few issues around cooperation, which is interesting as well. So broadly, they are engaging staff in the decision making again. I think it's tied to that involvement issue that we saw a little bit earlier. And again, we see that issue of development coming through. Last slide of stats, looking at gaps this time. So basically the biggest gaps here, although there aren't huge gaps in this case. Most of the leaders going through our 360s are probably a little biased in that they tend to be better leaders than the average people out there. But we see problem solving come out again. Receiving feedback is an interesting one. So that's the one different one that comes up this time. Acts upon feedback given by others. Now, how fascinating is that in terms of managing, correcting performance of others? One of the strongest behavioural characteristics of those people is they act upon feedback that they get from others. All right, so what are my conclusions from all of this? This is my last slide. Appraisal and bullying are not strongly predicted by the quality of supervision, but are much more strongly predicted by the overall culture set by leaders, I think, within organisations. So I think the focus needs to come away from that immediate relationship between a subordinate and his or her immediate supervisor. One conclusion from that is don't rely on supervisor training to solve problems around bullying. I think you've got to focus. There are bigger systemic issues in organisations that you've got to deal with. It doesn't mean you don't do supervisor training, but it shouldn't be the primary solution for you. Number 2, I think the focus has got to be on senior leadership. Select and appraise senior leaders for their ability to, we saw issues of recognition, development, involvement coming through in a lot of those issues, and that's coming from senior leadership and the culture that they set for the organisation. Number 2, a thought that I had going through this is that bullying is often less about the presence of bullying behaviours, and that's where a lot of the focus comes and a lot of the training for supervisors, but it's more about the absence of positive behaviours. And you do hear about the bullies out there. Clive Palmer was in the newspaper recently. There was this security guard or someone like that that was saying that he was a bully, and you hear about the Kerry Packers of the world and the like. But those people also have devoted followers, and yes, they may have bullying behaviours, but there's a lot of positive stuff in there as well. And I think the positive stuff gets forgotten in a lot of the discussion around bullying. Final tip, is that proactive behaviour issue that came up. Don't ignore, then pounce. Here's the final Dilbert cartoon. And I have to admit, I've been a little mischievous. I have tweaked the wording in this, but the theme is there. Don't give ongoing performance feedback, says the evil HR director. Ignore them until an employee screws up something big and then pounce. And we see the final slide over on the right-hand side here. And I've seen that in many organisations. Indeed, I've worked with one of those leaders fairly recently, that they wait, and then they pop and they pounce on the individual, and it comes out hard rather than lots of little feedback. So the recommendation, I think, is lots of little feedback often to staff, both positive and negative. Chris told a really interesting story. Chris Georgiou, who will present and maybe talk on this as well, told a really interesting story of indeed going through that process. It wasn't specifically about bullying, but it was broadly about setting an effective people culture within an organisation, and how the CEO started it, but how there were some problems at the executive level anyway. So it is hard, it takes time, can't happen quickly is a simple answer. And Chris's story is an interesting one about how you go about it, but you've got to look medium to long term.